We obey based on what we think the consequences will be. We obey based on whether it makes sense to us. But God is saying, you are not responsible for the outcomes, but you are responsible for the obedience. We don't share the gospel with our neighbors because we're thinking, I don't think they're ready for this yet. We don't invite them to church because we're thinking, I don't know who's speaking this morning, and I don't want to be embarrassed. We don't make those decisions because we're so caught up that you think you're responsible for the outcome, and God has said you have nothing to do with the outcome. But you are responsible for the obedient part. So many people, they bring folks to church, they didn't already mapped it out. I'm bringing them to church. The preacher's going to preach. They're going to run down to the altar. They're going to give their life to the Lord, and I'm going to say, yes! And then they come to church with you, and then they sit through the altar. They don't put anything in the offering. And then they leave, and then you start looking at them like, excuse me, you missed something here. You're supposed to come to the altar. You're supposed to give your life to the Lord so I can tell my friends I brought my neighbors. God is saying you overstepped your boundaries. You were only supposed to do the obedient part. Give them the invite. Once you've done the invite, you can sit in that seat and say, God, do what you do best. Salvation may come that day. Salvation may come next week. Salvation may come when somebody else invites them to their church. But understanding, we choose to do the right thing. We choose to obey regardless of what the outcome may be. Choosing. God honored Abraham's faith by providing a substitute sacrifice and blessing his ensuing generation with strength and multiplication. God honored the thief's choice by promising him a home in heaven. And he gives each and every one of us that same promise that when we live right, heaven belongs to you. When we act right and talk right and live according to his principles and precepts, heaven belongs to each and every one of us. Samson lost the delivering power of God and ended his life a slave, his eyes gouged out, doing the job of animals. He made a choice, but it cost him his life. He made a choice that was not in alignment with God's will, and it cost him his life. The unbearable guilt Judas felt after betraying Christ brought him to the end of his days that he couldn't take it no more, and he went out and hung himself. I don't think he realized the consequences, that he had no bearing, no say in the consequences. Might have changed the choices that he made. But he made a choice, and it cost him his life. God has given each of us the power to choose. But once we've made that choice, you don't get to choose the consequences. Consider Eve's choice. God gave them everything in the Garden of Eden. Everything, every flower, every fruit, everything. I mean, it was perfect. And he just gave them a warning. Don't touch this. Don't eat of this. Satan comes along and say, oh, but you have choices. You know, if you eat of that, you're going to be just as smart as God. And she thought about it. I've got everything at my fingertips, but maybe I can have more. Sometimes we get greedy. We have this sense of entitlement. Maybe I can have more. And she made a choice that cost them to be kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Reminds me of the story of the rich man that said to himself, self, I'm going to tear down my barns. I've got money, I've got everything, but my barns are full. I'm going to tear them down and I'm going to build me some more so I can put more stuff. We call that hoarders. Just hoarding stuff. Don't want to give nothing away. Just hoarding. Hoarding. You know, we have a rule. If you're going to bring something in, you got to give something away. If not, you become a hoarder. And he became a hoarder. Finances, everything. Didn't want to give anything away. And God said tonight, your soul is going to be required of you. Choices that we make. God does not give, he does give us free will and the power to choose whom we will obey, just as he gave Adam and Eve that same choice. When you are faced with temptations, remember the power of choice. You can choose to yield to the temptation, but once you have made the choice, you can't choose the consequences. On the other hand, as Christians, You can choose to yield to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, that comforter. Jesus said, I won't leave you comfortless, but I'm going to send you a friend. I'm going to send you a partner. I'm going to send you someone that will represent me. I'm going to send you someone that will tap you on the shoulder when you kind of make a misstep, that will remind you, don't do that. Go back and apologize. Go back and say you're sorry. The Holy Spirit, his job is to talk to us and bring everything to our remembrance about who Jesus is. His awesomeness and how much he loves us. That's the job of the Holy Spirit, to put us in check.